Hey everybody, Koldar here. Today we are looking at the Challenge Mode Gold Guide for Mogu'shan Palace. So I would rate this as a fairly difficult challenge mode, probably about a 7 on a 1 to 10 scale. The primary thing that makes this run difficult is that the timer of 12 minutes is quite tight. You're going to need to go very fast, have very high DPS, and use as many tricks as you can to get through in time. So to that end, the first thing you should really do is pull the entire front hallway in one single pull at the beginning. This will seem very daunting at first, and it's by no means trivial. But the idea here is, again, you're trying to use as many tricks as you can to save time. And since this is the very first pull, if you make a mistake, you can obviously just reset right away and try again. There's really no loss here. So as a monk tank, as we're running through the hall, I use Cake Smash on the initial pack or two as we're running past to build chi primarily and get threat, but also it will apply a slow so that the mobs are slowed a little bit. And that keeps them sort of spread out so that we're not dealing with the entire front hallway all at once. They're sort of staggered a little, and that will prevent your tank from taking quite as much damage. That said, it's very dangerous for the tank, primarily because the dogs will tend to jump on you and stun you. And while you're stunned, obviously you're not going to be dodging or parrying or anything. So damage is crazy high during that. So your tank needs to preemptively use cooldowns before the stun from the dogs. The stun can happen somewhat randomly, but it tends to happen when you reach the end of the hall, and then within about 3 to 5 seconds after reaching that point and aggroing that final pack. At that point, the dogs will usually stun and jump on you. So I usually have my cooldown going during that, and then our healer likewise has her cooldown going, spamming me. Once that stun is done, then generally you will be able to finish most of the mobs off before the next stun would occur. And as with any challenge mode, big pack, use your group's CC abilities and stuns as best you can. So I will AE stun for 5 seconds, and then our warlock would throw a couple stuns in a row, and that kind of thing. Now you'll notice that we engage this boss, fight the first boss, and then have a Stormlasher come in, or Stormcaller come in afterward. So you may have noticed in the initial pull, we actually hex the very first Stormcaller in that pair at the front as we're running past. And this is just to split up the first pull a little bit. Stormcallers are very damaging in terms of spike damage on the tank, just because they have the cast spells, and so they can burst the tank down very quickly. So we found it was handy to CC that first Stormcaller just to keep him from that initial pull. And then the timing works out such that around the time you're killing the first boss, he'll come into the room, having broken his CC, and then you can kill him at your leisure. It doesn't really matter at that point. The other thing to save a lot of time is that when you first enter this room with the boss, you will have to wait a long time for some roleplay, speech stuff to go on. So during that initial long hallway pull, we actually have our Shadow Priest rush into this room almost right away, really. It's very quick. And start that RP sequence. And then he comes back to help with the damage. And that way, once the first pull is about dead, the first boss is aggroing us, and we can actually engage right away. So once the second boss dies, Ming the Cunning, everyone should hug the left side around the pillar and come around the back of these mobs here. This way, once the third boss is attackable, you can pull him behind all the mobs, and this saves you 5 seconds or so, because otherwise you'd have to travel around the side after this boss dies. This way, while the boss is spawning, you can do that traveling. So this boss is simple. Just spread out your group members because of Conflagrate. This will spread to anyone within about 5 yards of the target, so make sure you're spread for that. And you'll notice here it can also target the tank, which is uncommon for these types of abilities. So there you can see it hit me, and because of that, the boss loses threat temporarily. So make sure you quickly taunt him back as a tank if that happens. And also, if you have other melee DPS, make sure you step away when Conflagrate is being cast on a tank or a melee so that it doesn't spread. Once the first Conflagrate goes off, you'll have a meteor coming up, so stack up the group preemptively. There you can see we're doing that. And if you're all stacked, it doesn't really do any damage. And then spread out once again for another Conflagrate. Depending on our DPS, you may or may not get this one. I think we just barely get it. Yeah, there it is. Now, once the boss dies, or sort of dies, stand on this platform that you see we're on right there, right near the edge. That way you'll immediately drop as soon as it becomes active or disappears. And that saves you a little bit of time. Now, this upcoming part is probably the biggest difference between our method and the majority of methods. So the common strategy for this section is to basically have one player engage the scout. That's down at the bottom there. The scout will put that player in combat and run off by himself. And if you wait a while, he'll eventually despawn and you'll drop combat. At which point, the entire group will use an 18-second invis potion plus some form of movement increase, so like a druid sprint, roar, and invis past these 3 poles. So the Ironhide pole, the Stalker pole, and this Hexer pole. Now the problem is, even with 18-second invis and a movement, the amount of time you have to do this is very low. You basically get 1 or maybe 2 chances to jump over the railing and get down to engage the boss. And just the margin of error is super low. So because of that, we didn't like the fact that you could screw up your entire run just from that invis section. And if you do so, because your invis potion's on cooldown, then you have to wait another 9 or 10 minutes to actually do the next run. So it's really a pain in the ass for learning. So instead, we do this other method, which worked well for us, which you see here. We basically follow the tank. So I'm the tank just running through in front of everyone. And I just aggro everything on the way up. And then we just jump over the platform and purposely die near the bottom of the stairs here in the boss's room. Now, obviously, you need some form of corpse recovery for this to work. So we have a soul stone and our shaman as backup. And for some reason, the soul stone didn't work in this case, but our shaman pops. So the basic idea, of course, is to just res everyone up as quickly as you can. Now, I'll fully acknowledge that this method wastes a lot of time. If you basically total up the amount of time it takes from when we drop down and engage the boss, so to speak, and start dying, to when we actually engage the boss for real coming up, it's about 90 seconds of time wasted. So if you can't make up that time elsewhere, this method's not going to work for you. But the good news is that you can use an invis potion later on, which I'll show you, if you get unlucky, and basically save yourself some time if the roamers at the top of the elevator don't cooperate, which they don't in this particular run. So anyway, it's a good method because it just allows you to not really think about the logistics of things, not have to worry about that invis timing and whatnot. But as I said, it does waste 90 seconds or so, give or take, depending on how long it would take you to kill the 4-pack at the top of the elevator, of course. So it's 90 seconds less the amount of time it would take you to kill that pack. So maybe closer to 60 or 45 seconds wasted. So not too bad. Okay, anyway. So once you have recovered or you just drop down and engage the boss right away, either way, you want to come around the side of one of these pillars so that you're line of sighting all the mobs. So you can see the red marker on the left there. And this just forces all the mobs to come around the pillar to get line of sight and bunches them up for you. So this boss is actually pretty simple. The main danger is that the stalker will stun the tank, and I'm pretty sure I did not dodge or parry a single stun on this pole. It was insane. I remember commenting to our healer. So, yeah, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. The main thing you want to do is have an interrupt assigned to the Oracle. This should ideally be a non-tank interrupter. So initially I was interrupting the Oracle as the tank, but what can happen is you can be stunned by the Stalker at the same time the Oracle is healing, and therefore you can't interrupt. So instead we have our Enhancement Shaman interrupting the Oracle, and then I try to interrupt the Hexer when I can. But missing an interrupt on the Hexer is not a huge issue. It just has a debuff that can be dispelled. So DPS priority should be the Ironhide first because it lowers the damage taken of all the other mobs. And then from there, just AE everything down. You just want to AE for maximum DPS rather than single targeting. And once the first mob or two starts to die, damage is pretty weak, so you shouldn't have much trouble. Now you may notice that I've had my DPS potion available this whole time, that icon on the left of my weak ores there. But this is on purpose because we are using Invis Potion after this boss at the top of the elevator, if necessary, basically. We don't know if it will be necessary, but statistically, it's likely that we will have to use it. So, once you kill that boss, make sure you're at the bottom of the stairs, basically, and watch for where the roamers are that will roam around in a circle around that first room. You don't want to engage those roamers if you can help it as you're running past the oracles. So if the roamers are on the left, make sure you're running up the stairs on the right, or vice versa. Usually they won't be in the way, but it's possible. Now the oracles you can just see as you run past or stun them or whatever. It doesn't really matter if you do it or not. They'll usually just stand back and cast on you until you go up top. And at which point they'll drop aggro at some point. So up here we're going to use Invis if we need it. And this 4-pack of roamers, you don't need them for the kill counter. So you can get lucky and have them be roaming just in the right position when you get up here so that you can just run past them safely without engaging them or anything. If that's the case, then you can use your potion cooldown for DPS potions and get a little bit more time savings. But in our case, they were in a bad spot, and that's usually how it will work. So here we wait for ourselves to drop combat from the oracles. Ideally, if you have a hard CC that you can do the oracles at range and therefore not get in combat, that will save you a little bit of time there. Anyway, so you want to invis all the way past the 4-pack plus past this section here, because this cross section has 2 roamers that can be there. And once you're right here, you want to grab this pair of high guards. So you can see there I'm just spinning to get the aggro as I run past. And then grab this 4-pack as well. And you want to fight all these 6 mobs together. So I mark the Flame Seeker just to make sure we get it interrupted, basically. So this pull can be a little bit scary. The main thing is that there's damage that hits the group. The shield guys throw their shields around, and Swift Blades will charge people and all that stuff. So there can be a fair bit of damage that is not related to the tank, basically, random damage. So there's Molten Barrage. You should stun or interrupt or whatever when that goes off. And otherwise just AE them down quickly. Now you can technically pull the dogs at the same time as this pack, but we found that was a little bit too dangerous because the dogs tend to jump around, stack up their dot damage, and that's a lot of extra damage. So instead we split it up into 2 pulls. So we do the pair and this 4-pack of roamers, so those 6, and then we'll pull the dogs and the boss as the final pull. And for the boss, you're going to need, maybe, it's tough to say, but with your DPS, maybe 90 to 120 seconds, just depending. So here we have 2 minutes, 30 seconds remaining, but you have to remember you have to kill at least 3 of those dogs. And if you're going to kill 3, you're probably going to kill the 4th since it's AE damage anyway. So you have to account for that, that damage loss. And dogs are somewhat annoying. You can stack up, and basically the dogs, they tend to jump on random players. But if you're stacked near them, they either won't jump, or if they do jump, it's basically no distance, so that you're not wasting AE damage. The problem is doing that, of course, means you're stacked up for the boss fight, and there's a lot of mechanics that hinder stacking up. There's the flame wreaths on the ground, there's the spinning axes, the smash, and all that stuff. So in the end, we found that stacking up was not really necessary. You kind of ideally just want incidental AE damage to kill the dogs rather than direct damage, because you want to focus on getting the boss down. The dogs will die before the boss does, even if your tank is attacking them. And of course, you're trying to get both the dogs and the boss killed about the same time. So because the dogs will die much faster, you can just focus on the boss here. You can see my position is not so great. We've got the melee DPS, our shaman, on the other side of the blade path there. So I'm moving through for him. And this is just a safer spot for us. Otherwise, the boss is pretty easy, just like heroic, just, more damage going on. Typically, your healer will probably want to save cooldowns for when the boss hits about 30 or 40%. And then the final sort of phase begins. You can technically use the beam attack. That's part of the achievement in this zone, or this last room, and hit the boss with that. But it felt like, more wasted damage running to click the beams and get in position than actually just keep attacking him. So we didn't bother with that. And of course, we lust during this. And you can see we've got 45 seconds left, so yeah, not too bad. As I said, if you have that issue with using the invis potions on that hall before the second boss, I recommend trying the res method if you have one available. And hopefully you can avoid using invis at the top of the elevator, use some more DPS potions, but otherwise, that is Mogu'shan Palace Gold Run Challenge. So, good luck, and thanks for watching.